So let me, I think let us start because it's 3:30. So friends, I'm very delighted to welcome you all to this policy roundtable on opening green windows, technological opportunities for a low carbon world. As you would have noticed, this is a title of this year's Technology and Innovation Report 2023, produced by UNCTAD, and it's very timely report, I must say, because it talks about the green transition, clean energy transition, which it calls green revolution, which is actually the correct usage of the term. And it is of particular interest for countries like India, which are trying to accelerate this clean energy transition with solar, PV, and all other types of green energy sources. And so, what are the opportunities presented by these green windows or green revolution for the global south, and how it can not only help in the clean transition and climate action, but also accelerate their economic and technological development? So, that I thought was a very timely contribution by UNCTAD on this debate. And this report looks into a number of these frontier technologies that go into this green transition. The market size of these technologies today or in 2020 was 1.5 trillion, as Clovis will talk about, but is projected to go up to $9.5 trillion at the end of the decade, which is very fast transformation, 9 times nearly in a decade. So, what could be the catch-up trajectories for global South and countries like India? And obviously, as the report points out, business as usual is not an option. You will need to have an active policy to harness these technologies. So there are many very important, issues raised in this report, and we will hear them all, from the lead author of this report, my former colleague and friend, Dr. Clovis Fryer. We really worked very well in Bangkok long time ago, and Clovis has continued producing very, very rich reports of the United Nations from his base in DESA earlier, now UNCTAD, and last year there was another one, Technology and Innovation Report on the new Industry 4.0 technology revolution, and this year on these green windows. So very good and deep thinking going into these reports, and who can be better to talk about the key messages of this report this year, and especially some highlights which would be found very important, relevant, and timely for countries like India than Clovis himself. So, Clovis, thank you very much for joining us and taking time out of your very busy schedule to share with us some key highlights of this report. And then we can follow up with your presentation by three panelists. And we are very happy to have Professor Suma Treya from IIT Center for School for Public Policy. And also she is associated with ISID as an adjunct professor. And Rasmus Lema, from joining us from Maastricht, my former home in 1990s, and celebrating King's birthday today, and he still managed to join us. So, and then Iswaran Narsimham, who had just returned recently from Tufts University, where he earned a PhD on green industrial policy. And so he has some deep insights of working on green industrial transformation. And so with that, I think we have very nice panelists, a very rich panel. And so I am really looking forward to a very rich discussion this afternoon with all of you. And I'm sure there will be time for open discussion at the end, where all of you can chip in. So without any further ado, let me invite Clovis to make his presentation. And then I will turn to the three panelists and then open up the discussion. So over to you, Clovis.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nagesh. It is a pleasure to be part of this policy roundtable and above all, engaging in this discussion with you, who I consider a mentor, having the privilege to work with you in our time at ESCAP, with our dear colleagues from ISID. And you do amazing work there, bringing timely and relevant topics and policy discussion on industrial transformation. And I think that is an amazing opportunity for us. And also a big hello to my colleagues in the panel. I look forward to the discussions as well. Let me share with you my presentation. I hope you can see that.
Yes, very, very clearly.
Okay, so again, I'm very happy to present you this summary of the Technology Innovation Report 2023. I had the pleasure, as Nagesh mentioned, to lead this amazing team that prepared the report, which include one of the panelists today, Dr. Rasmus Lema from the UNU Merit, that worked with us as an external consultant there. And also I would like to acknowledge Dr. Roberta Rabellotti from the University of Pavia, Dr. Andreas Stamm from the German Institute of Development Policy, and my colleagues in UNCTAD, Andrea Basil, Nizen, and Zenatan Hassanuddin. Let me start with the main message of the report. In the report, we argue that we are at the beginning of a green technological revolution, and the developing countries must catch this revolution early, at an early stage. So the report focuses on the opportunities presented by green innovation in developing countries to boost their economic and technological development. So it's not like to go towards green economy because as a cost or as an obligation because of climate change. We don't understand the imperative to deal with climate change. But what we are talking in the report is that by moving towards green production, by harnessing green innovation, that's an opportunity to boost economic and technological development of these countries. So this is to close this great divide that we see in income per capita between developed and developing countries, which has only increased with each technological revolution, as we see in this slide here. What we learned from history is that if countries misses this early stage of technological revolution, that create gaps that are very hard to close later. You know, if you go to Carlotta Perry, Chris Freeman, the literature on technological revolution, you see that countries that were able to catch up only able to do that at the early stage, at beginning of technological revolution, installation phase of it, not on the mature phase of it. So at the beginning of this new technological wave, every country is more or less in the same position. But as you know, early adopters move ahead quicker and then create advantages that make others struggle to catch up later. So developing countries need to really have strong responses to take advantage of these green windows of opportunity. That goes from government policies to private sector initiatives. And the access to the technology and know-how is not enough. Its timing is especially crucial. That, you know, without this timing, the green revolution will not close, but will just widen these global inequalities. There are great opportunities in development of green technologies, of frontier technologies, not only green, but frontier technologies in general. In the report, we try to have this comprehensive picture of 17 green and frontier technologies. So that includes artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, green hydrogen, electric vehicles, and many others there. The report, we analyze also things related to market size, potential to create jobs, most promising sectors. And these technologies, they already represent a $1.5 trillion market. That's estimate for that. And that could grow to over $9.5 trillion by 2030. That's about 3 times the size of the Indian economy today, to give you an idea. But so far, developed countries are getting most of these opportunities. So if we think about a total export of green technologies, and we see 2018 and compare it with 2021, the total exports of developed countries of green technologies, they jumped from $60 billion in 2018 to $156 billion in 2021. So almost tripled. In the same time, the same period there, exports from developing countries has increased from a similar starting base, $57 billion, but only to $75 billion. Okay, still an increase, but much less. And also that already includes the export from China. So if you consider the export from other developing countries, it's even lower, the increase. In the case of electric vehicles, for example, the export of top 15 exporter countries, all of them developed countries and China, they increased from $28 billion in 2018 to $105 billion in 2021, almost 4 times increase. And from the Asia Pacific region, we see China, Republic of Korea, and Japan as being major players in the region there. In the report, we had introduced in the 2021 report Frontier Technology Readiness Index that tries to assess how is the preparedness of countries to use, adopt, and adapt these frontier technologies, and also considering, the inclusive adoption of that throughout the society. And the index combines dimensions related to ICT, skills, R&D, industrial capacity, and financial indicators. This ranks it, this time around, we ranked 166 countries, and this ranks is dominated by high-income economies, such as the US, United States, Sweden, Singapore, Switzerland, and Netherlands. Those are the one at the top. The emerging economies are primarily found on the second quarter of this list. You have Brazil in the 40 position number 40, China 35, India 46, Russian Federation 31, and South Africa 56. So that's the index. If we take a look on the index, considering the position of India, we see that the index showed that some developing countries, particularly in Asia, they perform better than expected. And one of these countries is India. Actually, India was the greatest overperformer in the 2021 and continues being the greatest overperformer in the ranking now. It ranks 6-7 positions better than expected. Better than expected when you consider the GDP per capita of countries. So if you just take a look at the relationship between the position of grants and GDP per capita, we would expect to find India much lower. Other countries that overperform are Philippines, 54 positions better, and Vietnam, 44. So in the case of India, it's possible to see that a good performance for R&D and industry as well. In the case of industry, this comprises share of high-tech manufacturing total export, but also the share of digitally deliverable services in total services exports. And in that part, India is particularly well positioned. if we compare the average of the components of the Frontier Technology Index of India with the other countries in South Asia, we see that India is performing better in almost every component, with the exceptions are finance and skills that are not better than the average for the region. So it's interesting because the skills part that could be even a bit surprising when you think that the country has this large supply of qualified workers, right? But we measure expected years of schooling and high skill employment as a percentage of total employment. So in relative terms, high skills are less equally distributed in the work population. India ranks high in R&D due to the number of patents and publications, but there are definitely scope to improve on that, because if we compare India with other BRICS countries, the data that we have is that India spends the lowest amount on R&D in percent of GDP, it's about 0.66%. And if you consider, for example, Brazil, it spent 1.17%, and it's still not enough. And China is 2.14%. So there is space to grow there. Still talking about publications and patents, we know that in this knowledge landscape of frontier technologies, this is really dominated by the United States and China. And China has made a big increase and move in the past 10 years. So half of patents, for example, on Industry 4.0 are from China. So it's really a big amount. But the other countries, they also compete in specific categories there. And for instance, India shows a significant number of publications in Industry 4.0 frontier technology, such as AI and IoT. And overall, India is among also those competing in the production of knowledge products associated with frontier technologies. When we think about patents, so the number of Indian patents related to frontier technologies, it has been increased, and there was a big jump from 2008 to 2019 as well. In the report, we cover these frontier technologies related to Industry 4.0, but also related to the green transformation. So when we see this related to green transformation, in recent years, there has been a big increase in the participation of developing countries in renewable energy, for example. And India is among these top 10 economies that with installed renewable energy capacity for India, for wind energy, for solar PV, for bioenergy. So from 2010 to 2020, for example, India has tripled its installed capacity in wind and bioenergy. In the case of solar PV, India was not among the top 10 in 2010, but in 2020, it became one of the leading economies as well. So in the report, we provide analysis of the 3 paths where developing countries can take action to get the benefits from this new technological revolution. The first path that we analyze is by developing and using renewable energy technologies. The second one is by greening traditional global value chains by switching to digital technologies associated with smart manufacturing. And the third path is by diversifying the economies towards products and production sectors that are more complex, as we call that, meaning that they require higher levels of technology, but also are associated with lower carbon footprints. So these are the 3 ones. And if we go for looking for the first one of these paths, the renewable energy technologies, what we found is that there is a big variability in the catch-up trajectories at the sector and country level. So we really have to analyze different sectors. And when we go to see how countries that were able to catch up, what they have done, it's always lessons learned from each one of them. But regardless of this difference, the best scenario for catching these green opportunities is one where the country has strong preconditions and those are combined with a strong response from the country. So to give an example, in the case of solar PV and biomass in China, China had adequate preconditions for solar PV and biomass in terms of the sectoral systems and so on, but also show a very strong response in the development of the technology. Some of the key initiatives, for example, were the 2006 Renewable Energy Law that set incentives for the domestic firms to enter the international market. There was the 1,000 Talents Plan that attract global experts and experts from the diaspora. There was incentives to boost domestic demand. That is always very important in all of these strategies. And in case of China, we have things like the solar rooftop subsidy program that boosts the demand for the solar PV, among others. But we also see that if a country doesn't have these strong preconditions, it doesn't really mean that the window of opportunity is closed. Much really will depend on the response part, the response at different level of government and the involvement of a public, private stakeholders. So the strong response is what is really more important. To give an example again, in the case of the government of Thailand, when they were moving to a biofuel, they had to address some weak initial preconditions. There was a low interest from the private sector, for example, because of the high investment cost. But the government came with very strong policy response. There was subsidies, tax incentives, there was mandatory purchasing of energy generated, and that developed a strong sectoral-based system that was very much experience-based. So firms, domestic firms, using, interacting with this technology. So this is very important. In the case of the experience of India in producing, distributing, and using renewable energy technologies, we go a little bit on that in the report. And in the research done, it shows that in the case of solar PV, for example, the Indian national program, it really maximized the installed capacity, and that was by prioritizing cheaper price and importing the components instead of building up the domestic manufacturing capability for that. So it really attracts large projects offering low tariffs, incentivize energy developers to rely on these cheaper imports of solar cells and panels. But in general, there was a limited emphasis on R&D and building up the domestic production capabilities. So when local content requirements were introduced at some point, there was not really sufficient domestic capacity to fulfill the supply of that. So in 2018, under pressure from domestic manufacturers, the government even introduced some safeguard against solar cell imports from China and Malaysia. But this forced, and at the end, developers to buy more expensive panels. So it's slowing down a little bit some bidding process, and didn't really offer many benefits from domestic manufacturers. So those are some issues that we found there. If the manufacture of cells and the panels are not done yet, they are definitely not out of reach. There's still opportunities and also related to services on the value chain and not only for manufacturing of components. In the case of biofuels, we all know this ambitious program of Jatropha biodiesel development. But we also find that many policy changes were not implemented and production really fell short of the capacity. Public institutes did not carry out sufficient research and increasing the yields, resulting in some short duration crops. And perhaps a better approach could be to shift from Jatropha to an approach using multiple types of feedstocks or inputs instead of only one, with a better system of incentives, both at the feedstock and biodiesel production stage. Also, that would require increasing efforts on R&D and increasing the yield from this feedstock. Now, moving to the second path that I discussed, developing countries, they really could benefit from two processes that are happening now, that are increasingly intertwined, that are the greening of global value chains and the digitalization of global value chains. The greening of the global value chains, they can be done by switching to digital technologies associated by smart manufacturing. There are many examples of how Industry 4.0 can increase sustainability, can reduce energy use, can reduce material use, and so on, and so on and so forth. The other way to green these global value chains also through upgrading the value chain that can be based on these voluntary sustainability standards. This also can trigger a series of changes on the value chain, from upstream inputs to production process, from the product design to downstream consumption. So that can push a lot of change. And we, in the report, we mentioned how the governance of the global value chain, they impact this process as well. So it's interesting to understand that the different global value chains, they have different governance, and sometimes the more powerful part of the value chain, that is the company that has the brand at the end, it can push these voluntary sustainability standards, squeezing the suppliers by doing that. So that we discuss in the report as well. The third path, as I mentioned, is these opportunities for greener production for developing countries. And these are in the products that are more complex, require higher levels of technology, and that are also associated with lower carbon footprints. So in most low-income developing countries, economic diversification is really path dependent because it involves emulating industries that already exist in more developed countries. And then, in a steady progression, build the capabilities and move towards these industries. If a country already has the capacity to manufacture medium and high-tech products, of course it will be a much stronger position to do those moves. But if a country is largely producing primary products, well, a lot of countries, we have estimated that over 100 countries of the 195 countries that are members of UNCTAD, over 100 are commodity-dependent countries. So these countries that really rely on primary products, that they have fewer starting points for this diversification. But whatever path country choose to move, switching to green, governments in low and lower middle income developing countries, they really have to act fast and really decisively to find these products. It's not easy to identify them. In this slide, I'm showing to you how the average index of carbon footprint, carbon emission per capita, and an average public complex of different aggregate sectors they show. And then you see how chemicals are very complex, use a lot of technology, but also associated with much higher carbon emission. But when we look at each one of these sectors, we find products that have lower carbon emissions and products that have higher carbon emissions associated with higher carbon emissions. So we have a normal distribution that has a lot of variability inside each sector. The same with the complexity. So you really have to go inside and take a look. So to help countries to do that and choose greener paths, we in UNCTAD, we produce index of economic complex and carbon footprint for over 43,000 products exported in international markets. And we present a very original methodology that identify which are the most complex sectors with low carbon footprint. And we hope that can help countries to do this, to move toward that. But for selecting the more complex and greener directions, the governments, they really have to strengthen their national capacities to analyzing these new sectors. They also need to consider how they can fit into global value chains and so on. So a lot of building capacity of governments on how to take a list like that and short list and find the products that are really to be prioritized. This figure here, it shows how for each country, this complexity and carbon footprint index have changed over the past decades. So among the countries that have increased the most their complexity of their economies, like the use of technology in the economy, India, Poland, China, Turkey, Romania, Czech Republic, Vietnam. So India is right there. It's marked on red as on the countries that increased the most their complex. And in the case of India, there was a rapid increase in the index of carbon emission in 2010, but compared with in the past. But the index of carbon emission of India is not that high, actually, compared with the global average. So it was able to increase the complex without the associated carbon emissions there. Different from China, that also increased quite a lot their complexity compared with 2000, but with a big increase in carbon emissions associated with that structure of the economy. So that's a good news for the path followed for in the case of India. In all these three paths, a critical challenge for developing countries is the low level of existing technological innovative capacities. For example, that's what we are trying to show in this graph. Countries that are best placed to move to Industry 4.0, to smart production, are those that have stronger manufacturing already, these manufacturing capabilities, and that have higher levels of skills, because these technologies may augment those that have higher skills. So mainly the countries that have stronger manufacturing, higher level of skills are mainly advanced, industrialized, and knowledge economies, and knowledge economies as well. So in the Asia Pacific region, you have Singapore, Republic of Korea, but also you have developing economies that are well placed in the global value chains of high-tech products, such as the Philippines, Malaysia, and those are shown in the top right part of the quadrant of this graph. In the right bottom part of this graph are the countries that have manufacturing capabilities in value chain of high-tech goods, but have fewer high-skilled jobs compared with the total number of jobs that could benefit from Industry 4.0. And that there we will find China, Thailand, Vietnam, but also India in that part there. But the majority of developing countries neither have the capabilities on the high-tech production or participate on the global value chains, nor have the large share of high-skilled worker in total workforce. And they really are in this together there in this bottom left side of the graph, and those are the countries that risk to be left behind. So based on the experience of developing countries in earlier case of technological change, in the report, we argue that developing countries, they could take several paths to diversify those more complex and greener production and renewable technology. But in every case, technological catch-up would not be possible without a very proactive, strong government effort. So it really called for strong participation of the government, and also an enabling international economic environment. At the national level, what we argue is that there has to be a strong focus on alignment policies, aligning industrial policy with environmental policy, with energy policy. This alignment should be there at very high level. Should have prioritization of investment in greener and more complex sectors, and also provide incentives in infrastructure to help shift the consumer demand towards the greener products, towards renewable technologies. Of course, these more general pro-innovation policies, such as investment in R&D, digital infrastructure and skills, education of the public and the business sectors about the use of green technology, they still needed there. But on top of this more general policy, you need to have prioritization and a strong sense of aligning policies of the government. we have several examples in the report. I mentioned to you the example of Thailand, and there we had a Ministry of Energy developed, environmental regulation, but also they have encouraged factors to invest in biogas production. So many effort done. We also mentioned a case in the state of Ceará in Brazil. They are developing green hydrogen hub there. They have a port, they call Port of Pecém in this state, that it connected with solar and wind energy parks, and they have an export processing zone as part of the whole initiative. So all of that to take advantage of their renewable energy capacity and their port infrastructure. That's showing, how governments at different levels, doesn't need to be national level, could be state level, local level, that is very strong and pushing for those developments. In terms of the international cooperation, much of really success for domestic policies for many developing countries will depend on cooperation and also through international trade. We in the report, we argue strongly that trade rules, they should permit developing countries to protect their infant green industry through tariffs, subsidies, public procurement, so that they can develop those green industries, and they not only meet their local demand, but they also can reach economy of scale to make exports more competitive on those industries and so on. Of course, we always talk about some effort to review WTO rules in this direction, that we argue that this should introduce this consistency between international trade framework and the international agreements for climate change, because sometimes they seem totally disconnected. The same countries that discuss the international trade agenda discuss the international agreements on climate change, but there is a strong push for technology transfer when we're talking about the climate change agenda, and you don't see the same level of effort, let's say, on the trade agenda. So that should be this consistency. But of course, countries can also take steps within the WTO rules, right? Countries with large domestic markets like India, they can subsidize infant industry sectors for components of, for example, domestic solar and wind energy products. They can then they can start producing for import replacement, while at the same time strengthening the capacity for exports, and you do that by improving trade facilitation, ensuring a stable environment for trade, but you also building this capability there, and then when this capability is strengthening, they can take advantage of these exports there. In terms of intellectual property, that's another area in which the introduction of greater flexibility for less technologically capable developing countries will be critical, for them to be able to produce these products. So we argue that this flexibility, particularly for these less technologically capable developing countries, similar to things that were done during the COVID-19 in terms of vaccines, if you really are serious about climate change, we have to move there. In the report, we also propose several other innovative mechanisms. We talk about such a potential pilot program of guaranteed purchase of tradable green items, for example, that products, parts, and components use it for renewable energy, where we can have like a way to see how capable are countries, and they can start to produce some items related to their level of capabilities, their complexity of the economy. So then we can kind of escalonate that. So we have this interesting mechanism that could bring a cooperation on the production of these renewable energy components without creating a competition, unfair competition there. So in conclusion, I think that the most of the technology needed to promote economic growth and greener production, we see that they are already out there. What is really needed is this political will to help developing countries to build their capacities, to absorb these technologies, to innovate. You know, this is critical to have this political will to build this, to help these developing countries to build these capabilities. And developing countries, they should enact timely innovation, industrial energy policies that are coherent to catch this green technological revolution at an early stage. So with that, I conclude the presentation. Thank you very much, Nagesh, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Clovis. I think it was a wonderful presentation. I mean, not only the report is good, but you culled out the messages for India. And so where India stands vis-a-vis this discussion. And that makes it very interesting indeed. And so, and, besides the actions for the countries, developing countries like India, you also highlighted how the consistency in multilateral trade rules and IPR rules and all, the other industrial policy actions is needed. And so I believe, and I agree fully with you, that multilateral trade rules need to be looked at afresh and reconfigured in the context of this climate action debate. 20 years ago when they were written, there was no such discussion alive. And so they were written just for the primacy of trade. Trade was the end and not the, trade was not seen as the means, but the end. And that is why you have trade-related intellectual property rights, trade-related investment measures, that kind of agreements. And so we need to really go back to the drawing board and reinvent, reconfigure these trade rules. It's a very important point, I think, and I hope some action can begin on that issue in Geneva at some point. So, thank you very much indeed for adding value to the report for this audience in your presentation. And so let me turn to our, set of panelists before I open it up. And so first on my list is Suma. And I introduced Suma already. She had just recently joined the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi, and she continues to remain a visiting or adjunct professor at ISID. So over to you, Suma.
Thank you, Nagesh, and thank you for inviting me to be a panelist on this very interesting presentation and report. So I'm going to share my screen. So what was is a little bit about me. I've been for 35 years in the United Kingdom in different universities. That's how Rasmus knows me. But recently, I, for personal reasons, have moved to Delhi. I still hold my job at the Essex Business School, but I am actually also at the School of Public Policy and getting interested in questions less of strategy and more of policy. So that's a kind of departure for me. So what I found very refreshing about the report was the emphasis on technology and indigenous capability, not SDGs alone. I won't labor this point too much because I'd already spoken about it when we were introducing ourselves. I also like the fact that the report looks at the potential of AI, which is the other sort of big frontier technology for the greening of industrialization more generally. I think the other positive thing that comes out from the report, which is very much part of, I think, the UN ethos, is the emphasis and need for cooperation for the solution of global problems. I think that's how the UN was established, and it's a nice message to come out, and I think the chapter on cooperation has been written quite well. And also recognizing that amongst all developing countries, China is an outlier because there was a number of years when we would hear things about China as if this was easy to implement. But China has a unique governance structure, a leadership, and a strategy, which is in the group of emerging markets or developing countries very much an outlier than the middle. So we could call it state capacity. I mean, there are different ways to think about it, but I think it's nice that the report recognizes that everybody can't do what China does. However impressive are those achievements. So when I read the report, I started to think about what is this global public good in climate? Because we fling this term about a lot and we don't really think too carefully about what is the externality and how might we use the traditional toolkit of economics to solve it. So the thing about climate change as an externality is that the externalities are very far-flung. So something that happens in China could affect India. And the emitters are often very small. So the free riding problem can be very huge. So the environment, the air does not belong to anybody. A small company somewhere can pollute it. The direction of wind will take it to another country and so on. So the free riding problem is huge. And on the other hand, I mean, so this is the negative externality, but countervailing this, many of the solutions to climate change actually involve systems where there are significant network effects. Whether you think about it in terms of renewable technologies, or you think about it in terms of emissions control in global value chains, there are significant network effects. So there is going to be a strong first mover advantage to whoever moves first. I think this is recognized in the report that there is a strong first mover advantage. But it is not recognized in terms of the network effect quality of this countervailing force. It's more like there's an average cost curve, we work down it. But actually it's the strength of the network that creates this countervailing effort. Then the other interesting thing is, whilst there are supranational organizations and they may get their act together to coordinate solutions, there is no real global taxation authority. So who could impose a carbon tax or who could provide a subsidy. So it's not clear that those traditional instruments which we would use to deal with externality will work well when there's no centralized supra-government to implement them. At the same time, and this is, I think, the interesting thing here, that it's a global public good with so many different layers. Individual actors who facilitate the actions might be more important. So it's not the solution as much as the actors who bring those networks together, who are going to be a real value in this situation. And this could be, NGOs, for example. So some individual or agency needs to reduce the cost of moving rather than simply waiting to see what others do. So sometimes, like Greenpeace did this very well. They said, okay, we have this problem and we need to move the policy in this direction. They were not, and that's one of the reasons why Germany was an early adopter of technology policies. So both leadership in the sense of facilitation, like I said, NGOs might do, and in the absence of other instruments, and coordination in the sense of finding parties able to find a problem, as well as finding the problem that needs to be solved, can be very important. And again, I can't stress enough why I think civil society organizations may be so important in looking for a solution. Governments can do this, but because civil society organizations, especially NGOs, are committed to their core, their core communities whom they are serving, they are actually much better at finding the local solutions and the local agents. So this is something I want to put out there, because I don't think that the role of these actors has been as well explored in the case of climate change as it has, for example, in the case of public health. So, you think about the role of Medicine Sans Frontiers and the Access to Medicines charity by Jim Lowe. If you think about their role in bringing down drug prices and the studies that have been done on it, we don't have anything comparable to tell us what the climate change issue looks like. And I thought I'd just frame this problem and leave it up there. But following on from this, there are also some things that I didn't quite agree. I don't know if you can see the whole slide. In my screen, it's not showing that well. But the first line says, international technology transfer is useful when the same good is globally traded. And in the case of renewables, this is an open question. Can renewable energy be globalized? There's a very interesting blog post on this subject by an economics historian called Anton Holtz, where he pointed out that coal and petroleum were easy to trade globally because you could actually take the coal from one place to another and transport it. But he pointed out that natural gas was much harder to transport and is still a big problem in Europe. And this then opens up the possibility that there might be regional companies. So a company in Netherlands might find it profitable to build a pipeline to Poland. And so they get interested in investing in their neighboring, or a close by country. Similarly, we might, with enough battery power, be able to transport solar power from Sri Lanka to India, but it's never going to take this kind of global character that coal or petrol did. And so the extent of globalization here is going to be regional, I think. So then the question is, what should countries do? So if we cannot globalize, so if no, then every country must build its own capacities from scratch using subsidies and other means of acquiring technologies, which mostly means acquiring companies who have the technologies. This again, depends on what sort of access to capital markets you have, and so there's a story there which is part infant industry, part limited globalization, but I just felt that the report did not really delve into it, and maybe it wasn't meant to, but it's something that I started thinking about when I read that section of the report. But a last sort of set of questions that comes from this thought that your renewables can't be fully globalized is that what would then compulsory licensing of green tech look like if environmental conditions for the deployment of a renewable technology is dramatically different from where the technology originated. So I think these are some practical issues if we go down this, thinking about investment in renewables as a policy option. And so those are some thoughts on that. I'm also actually very interested in AI because of my previous history of work with ICT and software and so on. And I mean, the report really made me think, because I think, one of the things it has done very well is assemble all the information that we have on these frontier technologies. I don't think I've seen such a compact and comprehensive assessment anywhere else. So I began to think about what is making AI international. So, when we say we should use AI to green value chains, we are saying AI should be international. But what is AI really? It's computer power, it's a database, and it's an algorithm. I mean, if you strip it of everything, those are the three aspects. Data must be jurisdiction specific. I think the data from India will look very different from the data from Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. But the rules on data ownership vary widely, and in fact, in some developing countries are non-existent. So approaches to AI regulation are also marked at the moment by a lot of experimentation. So UK, US have come out recently with white papers. They've gone for a full market information kind of approach, whichever is the final market that I'm going to deploy AI in, the consumers in that market must have full knowledge of the potentiality and the potential harms of the AI. EU has mostly used the precautionary principle that it's going to only regulate those AI industries which are high risk and regulate those that are medium risk and ban those that are high risk. And China has yet another kind of approach where it aims to actually regulate algorithms and the data requirements on algorithms. So they distinguish between the Netflix type recommendation algorithms and the chat GPT type synthesis AI. They have different data requirements and they're going to actually regulate the data ownership according to those algorithm specific requirements. I don't know which is a good approach for a country like India or for developing countries. When you say good approach, it must be something that is commensurate with the overall objectives of what we want to do in terms of regulating data ownership. But it should also be consistent with the governance capacity that these countries have. And so there's a real danger, I feel, that will AI in green industries just end up handing data over to multinationals that are coordinating global value chains? So these are just some thoughts. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I just thought, they could maybe start some discussion based on the excellent work in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Suma, for raising some of the conceptual issues. And that is very helpful because that helps us to clarify our minds. And on your question about whether there is an international trade or globalization of renewable energy, at least something which hits my mind is hydroelectric power traded between Bhutan and India. Now Nepal and India, and Bangladesh wanting to import from Nepal through India.
Yeah,
so there is at least hydropower, if you consider it also renewable energy, which I think it is. There is growing trade in not only in this part, but in other parts of the world as well. But anyway, we will come back to this. So let me turn quickly to Rasmus. Rasmus is at the UNU Merit, which is a bigger institution combining Merit of the Maastricht University and UNU Intact, where I happen to have worked in 1990s. And so it's a much bigger outfit now, where Rasmus is working on issues concerning technology and innovation, green energy and all that, and has contributed to this report through writing a background paper which is cited in the report. So we would like to hear from you, Rasmus, how you see this report's messages for a country like India. Over to you, Rasmus.
Thank you very much, Nagesh, and let me share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and very interesting discussion. And also thanks to Suma already for these comments, are creating lots of thoughts with me. So I hope we get an opportunity to discuss this after this presentation. So basically what I'm going to do here, I think, is quite complementary to what Clovis already presented, and in fact also to some points made by Suma. What I will do, I will talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we provided for this background paper that went into the report. So elaborating a little bit more on the framework that has been taken up in the report, and also getting into a few cases. And I have thought I have picked a few also from India. So basically, this work builds on a trajectory, a program on this green windows of opportunity. First, initially done in collaboration with Xiaorong Fu and Roberto Rabalotti. a project that ended up in a special issue of Industrial and Corporate Change, focused very much on China and focused very much on a set of renewables and looking at the catching up trajectories of those sectors in China. Now then, for the report, we sought to look at a bigger array of technologies, still mainly renewables, but expanding quite a bit, and also looking at other countries that are not China, because as Suma already mentioned, state capacity and other factors are quite unique to that country. So what are these green windows of opportunity? We have been drawing quite a lot on the literature on technological catching up and of green windows of opportunity. In fact, an idea that came out of UNU Merit before it was indeed Merit. So back in the day by Luc Soete and Lotte Perez and others. So we try to think about this notion of green windows of opportunity. And of course, there are a lot of differences between earlier technological revolutions and the green transformation as of today, and that creates a unique setting in terms of what are indeed the opportunities. But we see these opportunities as having different components. They come in different forms, ranging between institutional, technological, and market windows. So while they can take on a number of shapes, what is quite clear for the sectors that we have been looking at, they are very much internally driven rather than external, so internal to the country, and very much driven by institutional change, both at the country level, but also international institutional changes. So for instance, already as mentioned by Clovis, the Indian National Solar Mission is a very good example of this. So an institutional internally created drive for deployment of renewables. But of course, the key is to then also appropriate the economic co-benefits of such initiatives. So in terms of exploiting these windows of opportunity, what is really key is the sectoral system of production and innovation related to those technologies. And in terms of preconditions, there are many factors that are important here. So we have natural conditions in terms of natural resource availability of various kinds, both for, of course, producing renewable energy technology, but also in terms of climatic factors such as sun and wind. The whole market, like in any other case, is also very important. The industrial structure and the capabilities and the existing infrastructure. I won't go into this about the responses. Clovis mentioned that, but of course, public sector drive and private sector initiatives are important. And now, also what is important is that how these responses are shaped, how sectoral systems are built around these technologies depend very much on some of these features of the technologies. So their maturity, there's a very big difference whether you want to advance solar PV, a rather mature technology, or whether you want to advance concentrated solar power, a much more immature technology. And then there's the issue of tradability, not of the energy itself, as Suma was talking about, but the tradability of the underlying technology. So there's a big difference between hydropower, which is not tradable at all in terms of the technology, at least to a very small extent, as composed to solar PV panels, which, as we know, can be shipped over long distances. So based on this idea of the sectoral system and the precondition, Basically the preconditions and the responses. We have been thinking in order to create some vocabulary to discuss quite a number of cases. We've been thinking about these 4 different scenarios for exploiting these green windows of opportunity. So if both the preconditions and the responses are strong, that's of course the ideal scenario. It can translate into realized opportunity through this effective window seizing. You can also have strong preconditions, but in fact the responses are quite weak, which leads to a missed opportunity. On the other hand, as already mentioned, you can have weak preconditions, but a very active approach, which can help you address this window. So that's the basic scenarios. Of course, there's the last one of distant opportunities, if both preconditions and responses are weak. So based on this framework, let me try to go through just a few cases in order to think about that, because this framework is really meant to order our thinking of how different countries and sectors are performing in these sectors. So basically, if we think about the wind energy sector, in the report we looked at China at earlier periods in time as effective seizing, now falling behind in the latest period of time. And we also see some quite big differences between some sub-Saharan African countries in terms of their experience in the wind energy industry. Maybe we can get back to the case of India here. It was already shown that in terms of deployment, India is actually quite fast moving at the moment. But in terms of then reaping the economic benefits, I'm not sure exactly where India stands here. So hopefully somebody in the audience can talk to this point. But basically, in order to give some flesh to some of these categorizations here, the case of China in the wind energy industry, moving very early, already from the 1980s, very much driven by international policies, preferential loans and grants and so on, and technology transfer initiatives. Over time, you saw domestic companies moving into the space. You saw local content requirements being introduced at a point in time. You saw very active approaches by private sector companies, acquisition of technologies and even companies from abroad to facilitate this upgrading trajectory. And by the 2010s, China was very much at the global frontier, almost at the global frontier in this sector. Now, what we have seen in the most latest period of time is that the type of innovation that is important for the sector is really changing from beyond the wind turbines themselves, but moving on to other types of energy management, energy storage issues. So basically, there was an insufficient response by the sectoral system to really to bring together also some of these IT technologies and green technologies that Clovis was talking about. So at the moment, falling a bit behind. I'm working on some patent analysis to show this with colleagues. Then a bit more briefly, in terms of the sub-Saharan African cases, what is really interesting is that you see a very big difference how the wind energy sector was approached by Ethiopia and Kenya. So in Ethiopia, there was a very strong will in the government to use investment projects coming from both from China, from Europe and the US, to learn from these projects, know about the technology and feed that back into the system with the universities and companies and so on. Whether this is actually going to translate into significant industrial development is an open question, but there's a very active approach there. Now, this has to be then contrasted with Kenya, where again, it was very much driven by external finance and support, but these projects were approved on an ad hoc basis with no conditionalities in terms of industrial development attached. It has translated into very local involvement of companies and very few jobs created for the local workforce. So there you see some quite varied outcomes. Now, just a very quick point, of course, this all has to be seen in a dynamic perspective. So, for instance, here how China has been moving along some of these quadrants over the development. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about the electric vehicle sector, which is different in terms of what I mentioned earlier. In the wind energy sector, it's much more localized, internally and institutionally driven. In the electric vehicle sector, you see a very different scenario. It's much more external and driven by technological changes. So just to go into some of those cases that you see here on the screen. Now, I have put South Africa and Brazil there somewhere in the middle, because this is a fast-moving sector and the jury is still out. But let me just talk about a few of those cases. Quite similar to the wind energy sector in China, a very active industrial policy, a lot of experimentation, a lot of failure, a lot of basically money being wasted on some of these investments that did not go anywhere. But in the end, we have quite a significant technological development in this sector with China. So it's originally mainly in sort of trucks and buses, not in passenger vehicles. In the most latest phase, China is also catching up now in passenger vehicles and having advantages, in fact, quite a lot in terms of integration of softwares and so on into the cars. And of course, this is an interesting case in the sense that China has been trying to catch up in the sector for many years. I mean, the auto sector in general, without having very much success in that. But once you see a technological change, then China was able to move on that quite fast. And now you see in Europe the share of Chinese electric vehicles on the roads are increasing quite drastically. Now, in India, there's also a quite active approach with this National Electric Mobility Mission Plan. And what is a strong point for India is, of course, the very substantial automotive sector here, extended supply chains. But then on the other hand, in terms of the whole market, there are some uncertainties, not least because, of course, the electricity grid and the strength of that in terms of charging and charging stations. And also there's issues about lithium imports for the batteries. So the jury is still out also on how important the access to lithium is actually going to be for success in the sector. So again, the jury is still out, but an active approach. Now, this can be contrasted with South Africa, that has a very important auto sector, mainly for exports to the European market. It also has access to natural resources. But at the moment, we see no response by its mainly foreign OEMs that are operating there in terms of shifting to electric vehicles. So the activities undertaken in South Africa there. And we see very few also developments in the supply chain. So there are, of course, battery manufacturers there in South Africa, but producing traditional batteries and producing batteries for electric vehicles are completely different ball games. Also, in terms of the local market, there's a very small market for electric vehicles. The grid with what is called load shedding, so planned power outages, is a big hindrance for South Africa in this sense, and the risk of falling behind now, as you see all of these European countries that are shifting now to phasing out internal combustion engine vehicles completely. You see, when South Africa is locked into that kind of technology, there's a real risk of falling behind. So let me just very briefly summarize some of the key points. There are windows of opportunity with greening, with the green transformation. They're very often driven by internal institutional changes, but not always, as I have mentioned. And there are both opportunities, but also risks associated with both types of opportunity. The seizing of these windows, it depends on the preconditions and the responses, as I have mentioned. And as I had talked about cases, we see very different types of outcomes. The co-designing of policy packages across different policy domains is very, very important, and can add to that what has been discussed. Also, national and global policy needs to be thought about in conjunction. And again, we have very different types of technologies, and the types of systems that are built around these technologies have to be tailored to some of these features shown here as tradability and technological maturity, but also others. But let me stop here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rasmus. Again, a very interesting set of discussion and issues raised. I think you referred to the wind energy, and I was wondering, what happened to India in this case? Because unlike other renewable energy technologies, in wind energy, India had a national champion, Sujlon Energy, vertically integrated manufacturer of wind energy equipment, and yet we are not seen as a important player in this. So one needs to look into that. I used to be keeping track of that company some years ago. Of late, I have lost sight of, but I think this is an important thing to look at. And I agree with you that in electrical vehicles, big constraint for India is the battery, lithium-ion dependence on imports. And unless that is sorted out, one can't really make a big mark in the EVs. But we'll come back to some of the points that you have raised. Thank you very much for bringing them to the table. Now, let me turn to our last, but not the least, panelist, Iswaran Narasimhan. And I already introduced him in the beginning. So over to you, Iswaran.
Thank you, Nagesh. I'm just going to quickly share a few slides that I wanted to discuss.
Yes.
Are you able to see the screen? Yeah. Thank you, Clovis, and thank you, Rasmus, for the amazing and insightful presentation, and thank you, Professor Suma, for your comments on the UNCTAD report. And I agree with a lot of points that all three of you raised during this discussion. And I'm going to reinforce some of those points with my own research work, as well as bring up a few additional questions. So I've been recently working on a decarbonization modeling exercise using a model from Energy Innovation, an outfit based out of San Francisco. And we have been trying to create the best possible decarbonization pathway for India up to mid-century, while also addressing economic objectives alongside emissions reduction objectives. So one of the scenarios that we created in addition to the business as usual is a scenario to raise ambition, which is to peak India's emission, which you don't see in the business as usual case, and then bring it down to a point where it would potentially be able to go to net zero by 2070. So if you look at the major opportunities here in this exercise that we've been doing, you can see that there are significant opportunities for decarbonization in the electricity sector and transport sector, particularly in the industry sector, which is going to grow in terms of emissions at least for the next 20 years before it starts decarbonizing. So, and in terms of the job opportunities that the whole energy transition can create, there is a potential to create close to 50 million jobs. If you look at the ratio of that, that would be 50 million out of 800 million total jobs in the economy by mid-century. And it could lead to significant amount of direct jobs in manufacturing, as well as indirect and induced jobs in allied sectors. And we see that a decarbonization policy package is also likely to increase the GDP growth of the country more than what a business as usual scenario can create. So in terms of opportunities, you can see here that there are significant technological opportunities in the electricity sector. India should go from the current 50 gigawatt of commissioned solar power to 1400 gigawatts, and wind, offshore and onshore, similar numbers by 2050, and a huge amount of battery storage or pumped hydro storage. And in the industry sector, a significant deployment of green hydrogen is required, and that translates to more than 150 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity. And in the transport sector, India needs to add several million electric vehicles, cars, two-wheelers, buses, as well as some hydrogen-based vehicles in the freight sector. So these are all big technological opportunities. If we have to connect this to the UNCTAD report, these are the domestic market opportunities that India has right in front of it in the energy transition. But there are challenges in terms of reaping benefits, economic benefits from these opportunities. And I'll go to that discussion next. So the report mentioned that India, in fact, ranks significantly high in terms of its R&D output, even though it doesn't spend a lot of money on R&D. It does rank significantly high on R&D. Now I'll focus specifically on India's energy RD&D investments and clean energy RD&D investments compared to other countries. This is a paper that I co-published with my colleagues at the Fletcher School, Tufts University in 2021. And you can see here in the graph on the left, as well as the graph on the right, that there's significant energy RD&D investment from India, which is the color yellow on the left. But you can see in terms of clean energy RD&D, it is pretty much negligible compared to other major economies in the world. And particularly, India's energy RD&D investments are mismatched to the deployment trends that you're seeing in the country, and thereby compromising long-term job creation opportunities and the possibilities of climbing up the value chain in terms of the clean energy technologies that would be crucial for deep decarbonization. And if I have to give an example, India's solar RD&D investments are negligible compared to the level of deployment that you have been seeing in the last 2 decades, which was a point that Clovis mentioned during the presentation, that India has focused much more on prices, achieving low electricity prices, making use of the global crash in terms of solar component prices, and really reaping benefits in terms of deployment. But when it comes to RD&D, there is a clear mismatch as most of its energy RD&D goes towards fossil fuel technologies and nuclear energy compared to what you see on the deployment side. And in terms of the manufacturing challenge, India needs to add close to 50 gigawatts per year until mid-century. If it were to decarbonize to a point of 2 gigatons of emissions by 2050, which would be on track for a net zero emissions by 2070. And the current manufacturing capacity of solar PV is close to 15 gigawatt of modules, and current manufacturing capacity for wind is about 10 gigawatts per annum. And when it comes to battery storage, India requires 15 gigawatts per year until 2050. But if you look at the manufacturing, it's pretty much negligible. And none of these are related to the policy incentives. In fact, India has taken a much more active approach. You have production-linked incentives to encourage battery manufacturing. In fact, it recently awarded incentives to manufacture close to 12 gigawatt of 4-hour battery storage by 2027. And when it comes to the electric vehicle sector as well, there are big players in the two-wheelers as well as the car segment today. A couple of really good domestic manufacturers on the two-wheeler side as well as in the automobile, four-wheeler automobile industry, but they all depend on mostly on imported EV components, particularly the high-value chain components. And when it comes to hydrogen, which is crucial for industrial decarbonization, India needs 5 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity addition per year, but the manufacturing is pretty much negligible. In fact, India has implemented a very ambitious green hydrogen mission, and in the recent budget allocated close to $2 billion of future investments towards hydrogen. But we are yet to see how much of that is going to go towards incentivizing electrolyzer manufacturing, as well as domestic production of hydrogen, both for exports and domestic consumption. So here I want to bring in China, which everyone noted is an outlier. This is some research that I've been doing for some time. And I want to look at how India compares with the trajectory that China has taken. In fact, if you go back to the 90s, both India and China were starting off with similar efforts in the clean energy sector, but diverged significantly over a period of time. And a lot of that, if you look at it, is related to the level of RD&D investments that have gone in towards clean energy technologies. And that directly relates to the number of jobs that China has been able to create in the renewable energy sector compared to what India has been able to achieve over time per megawatt of capacity installed. In fact, if you look at the solar sector and the wind sector, more than 50 to 60% of China's jobs come from the manufacturing side, while most of India's jobs in solar and wind sector come from deployment. And China's approach has been much more of a techno-industrial policy approach with supply-side policies, combined and carefully sequenced with global and domestic market formation, often catering to global market formation. And when global markets fail, or there is geopolitics happening in the global markets, it makes use of the huge domestic market that it has to its advantage. And given the fact that it has technologically caught up by then, it is not that difficult for it to compete with global players as well in the domestic market. And India's domestic market formation, like Clovis and other Rasmus mentioned, has been on capitalizing the global decrease in the renewable energy costs. And industrial policy has been primarily limited to localization of component manufacturing, rather than an emphasis on RD&D investments. And if you look at this comparison, just to take home the point, if you look at a few parameters, such as industrial development, indigenization, technological upgrading, cost minimization, short-term profit maximization, and several others that I looked at, you can see this very clear difference that India's primary objective was focused on giving the most affordable electricity price. And this is very closely tied to the political economy of the electricity sector itself. It is not something that India wished to do. It did want to create room for domestic manufacturing to thrive, but there is a significant political economy pressure in the electricity sector that pressurizes the national government to actually focus on achieving the most affordable electricity rates from renewable energy. But if you look at what manufacturers did, despite having a lot of incentives, focused on short-term profit maximization, or when they were manufacturing solar components or wind components, compared to China's manufacturers who actually focused much more on technological upgrading. And that also is partly influenced by the heavy emphasis on industrial RD&D in China compared to what was existing at that point in India. And if you compare these two approaches, the conclusion that you come up with here in terms of implications for India's green industrialization in future is that India should look at green technologies from a techno-industrial policy approach. In fact, be much more state-driven in pursuing industrial policy, and carefully sequence policies and keep policies stable for a much longer period of time, which it failed to do in the past. And also looking to the global markets and carefully observing and making sure that its industrial policies can exploit global market opportunities. And it has been going in that direction. I would say that there has been a significant state push in terms of a green industrial policy, and the recent budget was an example. Green hydrogen mission is an example. There is a techno-industrial policy approach as well, focusing on specific technologies and incentives to catch up on specific technologies. While this is in a usual situation, while this is significantly risky, I would say it's not that risky given that we know that there are a few handful of technologies that are going to play a big role in the energy transition. So I'll come back to the report and put up a few questions that I think that I want to ask after reading the great report that UNCTAD has released. One is the governance aspect, especially for India to industrialize in the energy transition with the changing global landscape. What is the way in which WTO rules can be aligned with the Paris Agreement? Are there windows of opportunity in terms of institutions to actually make this happen, as this would be very crucial, given that we are all trying to solve a global commons problem in a world where we are all protectionist in a way for making use of our technological prowess and knowledge and capabilities. And in terms of finance, access to international climate finance, particularly for domestic green industrial policies, is very controversial. Access to climate finance for deployment policies or deployment efforts has not been that difficult at all. In fact, India has enough finance, I would say, in the renewable energy deployment sector. But access to climate finance for domestic green industrial policies has been a major challenge. And access to lead markets, which is specifically mentioned in the report, now has become much more complicated compared to what China did in the last 2 decades. It's a bigger challenge for India now to climb up the clean energy value chain in an era of deglobalization and onshoring of supply chains, with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, with the Green Deal industrial policy, and the Fit for 55 package in the EU, and as well as the CBAM in the EU. The world is much more complicated now, with developed, advanced industrialized countries trying to onshore a lot of supply chain, of course, to make sure that they can sell the energy transition domestically and create job opportunities for their own citizens. But that also leads to a situation of deglobalization of clean energy value chains. And it poses a challenge for countries like India that are trying to catch up in this situation? What kind of an access it will have to the lead markets? Are we going to move towards a world of friendshoring, or are we going to continue to be in a world of global value chains? And then finally, access to resources, a point that everyone emphasized here, is crucial for clean energy production in India. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Iswaran, for bringing up some very interesting points. And also, in particular, I'm very happy that you highlighted the criticality of green industrial policy for India at this juncture, if we are to get anywhere in harnessing the potential of the green technological revolution at all. So I think all of these points which four of you have put on the table are very, very important. And we will have to keep mulling over them for months, if not years, to take them forward. Now, I want to, although we have run out of time, but I want to, with your permission, extend this by 10-15 minutes and have some discussion. So I want to see who wants to go among the audience for any points, clarifications, questions to the panel. And then I will invite you all to bring some closing points if you wish to. So who wants to go or take the floor? Are there any hands? No, I don't see anyone raising hand. So in that case, Clovis, a number of points have been raised on your presentation, some complimentary, some seeking clarification, and some disagreeing, so maybe you want to respond to some of them, so you have the floor, Clovis.
Thank you very much, Nagesh, and thank you very much, colleagues. It was great to listen to you and to your insights and views on that. For sure, thank you very much, Soma, for your reading of the report and the points that you brought. I just would mention a few. I think that you're totally right. We didn't mention too much the network effects as being very important to creating the winners. I think that is a very, very important point. And I think it would open up a very interesting line of exploration and research for us to see this aspect as well. And as you said, these solutions, they require a significant network effect and the production that also it's related to many elements and components. So you have from the raw materials, from global value chains and everything, and understanding and being part and taking a significant foot on that global value chain is very important. And it's interesting to see that India could take an advantage of that in some aspects of this value chain, even though we have discussed the issue of raw material like lithium, but you have when you have the use of AI, IoT use on being so important, and you see that India has already also moved quite far on that, position well on and in services related to that can be opportunities there. I think in terms of tradability, we discussed a little bit on that. The tradability that we also consider in terms of renewables, as Rasmus mentioned, was also related to the components and parts related to not only the trade of the energy per se, but so it was really broadening the industrial view of that, all the things that go inside of the production. And then after you also are able to install and have those renewable projects done in your country, you can also export services on implementing that to other countries. So that's also interesting elements there. But I totally agree that we can discuss.
Clovis, if I could interrupt, I see on the chat box that Professor Thomas Pogge of Yale is trying to make a point, and maybe there is something for you to respond to. So let us listen to Professor Pogge. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you. I finally found out how to raise my hand.
I didn't see your message earlier. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But you have the floor. And very welcome. Very welcome to have you. Very nice to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this wonderful session. Can I be heard?
Sure. Yeah, you are very clear. Yes.
Super. So I had trouble finding the hand raising feature. So I thought this was a very interesting and dense session, and I learned a lot from it. And I was wondering, obviously, in the end, what we want is these green technologies to do as much for the planet as possible. So we want these green technologies to spread. We want people to use them. And especially in the global south, people are very price sensitive. People are a lot of poor people, and so they cannot pay a lot of money for green technologies. If green technologies are more expensive than their dirty alternatives, then it's clear that poor people will often have to choose the dirty alternatives. Now, my question to you is, how important are patents in all of this, right? There are, I sort of leafed through the report as we were discussing it. There are tens of thousands of green technology patents. And of course, the people who develop these technologies and who patent these technologies want to get paid. They want to get a return on their investment in developing them. So obviously, this will be reflected somehow in the price. And so my question is, are there ways in which we could incentivize the development and especially the diffusion of green technologies in such a way that we make them cheaper, especially in the global south? And would that potentially be a way in which we could intensify the development, especially of those green technologies that are particularly suitable for poor populations?
Thank you, Thomas. A very good point. And I'm sure my colleagues and panelists will respond to it. So over to you again, Clovis.
Right. So I will not take much time, but I think it's a very important question there, and I think I'll try to wrap up. But I think that's it's really the big conundrum, right? You have to spread very quickly the technology, and then one could argue that better to buy from countries that can produce cheaper and then use them. But at the same time, we would like to have the countries to build their own capacities to develop these technologies and to produce those products, because actually the scale of the change that we're talking about really would require everybody to jump in and to do that. So in terms of patents, of course, what we saw from the experience, for example, in the terms of the COVID, that was not that too much was related to the problem of the patent, even though it was a big discussion related to patents, but there was also the importance of the capabilities to produce that were not in place in many countries. So perhaps what we try to push quite a lot in the report is really to build these capabilities, because even if you have access to the patents, in many countries you don't have any capability to interpret them and to implement them. On the other hand, it's also important to facilitate this emulation, right? The imitation to the level of Excel. And for sure, if you have a international IPR system that is very stringent, that creates problems for many countries. So there is a balance that we have to look there. But I think in a way, to summarize, I think that we think that a lot of this technology, for sure, is embedded knowledge that comes in the product, but there's a lot of is tested knowledge that is by doing, by implementing, and this tested knowledge is in many of those, particularly less tradable energy, renewable energy is very important and would require countries to build these capabilities. I also would like to let some time for colleagues to respond there. I think I would just move a little bit quicker, but I'll tell that Rasmus, of course, we have worked together, so it's great always to hear you, and it's great to have your examples there. And was great to hear to you, and the questions that you put at the end in terms of governance, the finance, access to lead markets, and access to resources, I think they summarize the critical points that are at the table, strategic points today. So thank you for that. And I think that India has a very important role to play in any one of them because of the size of the economy, the importance in terms of an emerging market, and not being China or Brazil, let's say, in terms of being positioned I would say that because sometimes Brazil is not tries to move alone too much, let's say, and of course China, we see the polarization with the West. So India would have a very important role to play, I think, in these aspects of governance related to WTO, in the aspects related to finance. The access to resources is a very interesting point. I'm now, I've just finished this report, and I'm now working on the commodities branch in UNCTAD. So I'm working much closer now with the issues related to commodities and commodities for renewables, so lithium, cobalt, and so on. And there is a lot, very fast technological change there as well. So batteries are changing quite a lot. The amount of minerals that we use reducing quite a lot. So very interesting things to see to follow on the technological change on that aspect as well. I think I will stop here, but just to complement that, India has a big role to play in this whole process.
Thank you very much, Clovis, for these additional comments. And before I close, I just want to check if Suma or Rasmus want to have one kind of closing remark or 1 minute each, because Iswaran had to leave at, he had some other commitment, so he's already switched off. But Rasmus or Suma, you want to take?
I just want to say something about the IP issue.
Go ahead.
So, Thomas, you're quite right that in the most recent period, some estimations I did on the role of IPR in technology transfer suggests that IPR have actually been a hindrance. That is to say, the more stringent the IPR, less technology is transferred. But I think more pertinent is the fact that if indeed these technologies are going to be somehow at a smaller global scale, like let's say more in regions or in nations, then the international patent climate does not really matter, because you're within a domestic economy largely. So I don't know how this will play out in terms of IPR, but it's definitely clear that the solutions that were used for medicines like patent pooling, I don't really know if it'll make sense in this context, because the technologies are quite diverse as well.
Good. Thank you very much, friends. I think this is a very interesting discussion. Rasmus, you want to have a last minute, or you're fine? You're muted. Yes, go ahead.
Well, yes, I just want to say that I very much agree with these points about the intellectual property regime. And as Clovis pointed out, it's about alignment of these different policy domains, and intellectual property has to be a part of this. So basically, if we look at the COVID period, where there was suspension of some intellectual property rules for vaccine production, something like this also has to happen in the space of green technology. So we need to have a reform of the intellectual property regime here. And we also probably need to make the kinds of exemptions of the intellectual property which is created going forward.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important point. I think another very important point is, you didn't mention that, Clovis, but this idea of a fund to help shape the direction of technology is very important, because as was also raised in the chat, how can we create technologies that also absorbs labor in the case of India and so on? How can we combine electrification in rural areas, more sort of appropriate technologies as we move forward, because this is absolutely key.
Thank you, Rasmus. So with that, I think we need to close this discussion, this fascinating discussion, I would say. We could have continued for a long time, but I know there are time constraints. We have to really come to the closure, but I am sure that we will remain engaged with everyone on these very important issues. I think today's discussion has raised how critical it is for countries of the global south like India to get into this new green technology revolution quickly and fully. And so industrial policy is certainly very critical, and we need to quickly get the interventions, strategic interventions, whatever is needed, right. And also the equal importance of global cooperation, international cooperation, in rewriting and adjusting the rules, multilateral trade rules, to make them fit for purpose, fit for the climate action agenda. So, Clovis, you highlighting the role of India in your last concluding remarks, I think we should not forget that the G20 presidency of India should be a kind of leverage for raising these issues on the, in the global scale, global forum. And interestingly, India's G20 presidency will be transitioning from India to Brazil and to South Africa. So this is global South, trinity of global South, running this global platform for the next 3 years. It's a very interesting time. And if we can really take advantage of and leverage that to get some coherence on what kind of global rules on trade would be needed to speed up the climate action and access to new green technological revolution would be very important, very interesting, very timely. So I think this discussion was most enjoyable one I could think of on this theme, very timely, and we will remain in touch with you. We also plan to put it together and the highlights of this discussion into a policy brief, as we generally do. And we certainly would continue this series of policy roundtables on important issues such as green industrial revolution and green technological transformation. So with that, I want to thank Clovis and my colleagues on the panel, Rasmus, Suma, and Iswaran. Also, Professor Thomas Pogge, it is such a delight to see you on the screen. Join us for this session. And I saw you were tweeting also about it. So very interesting. And so I'll touch base with you. And next time you are in Delhi, please do alert me. So we should continue our discussion of the past and do something together. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this very interesting discussion. And so we will remain in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nagesh.